Keith McNally. This is the Question Guy podcast. I'm here with Karina and Diane or Diana. How do you want
Diana.
Diana? Okay, good. And I say that because there's only one name on the Zoom call, but there's two ladies here. And so I want to get everybody who's watching and listening to the conversation, please go ahead and introduce yourselves separately, and then let's get into the conversation.
Okay. I'm Karin and Edgett. I'm a visionary artist, and I am a co-host of the 1 to 9 podcast, where we have multidimensional conversations and
with multidimensional beings.
with multidimensional beings. We never know who's going to be a guest on our podcast, and they're I'll go ahead and let Diana introduce herself.
Okay, I'm a retired librarian. I'm Diana Snigurowicz. You don't have to remember the last name. You don't even have to know how to spell it out. I'm a retired librarian, and like Karina was saying, we got into doing these podcasts where we have conversations with multidimensional beings, all types of anything that's out there, and that is that we can communicate with, which is basically everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Colors.
Animals.
So before we kind of take a deeper dive into that, this had to start somewhere because there's too many things here that I've got lots of questions. And so we need to start from the beginning. How did the two of you meet? So let's start with the very basics.
Oh, I
How
like
did
to
the,
tell this story.
how
Yeah.
did the two of you meet? And then we're going to talk about how we got into talking to interdimensional beings, and then we'll talk about the podcast. So let's start there. How did the two of you meet?
Okay.
This is Karen's part. This is Karen's version of it.
This is my version of the story. We both belonged to the same gym, and we were both doing yoga classes. And often Diana and her husband would come to the same yoga classes that I was in for years and years and years. And I'd always notice them, and sometimes I'd wave, but they never really said hi and never saw me. But then Diana and I started separately taking a high intensity training class together. And so you tell now the story of how you noticed me in the class.
Well, I noticed you because at one point you were doing handstands after the class.
No.
Oh, okay.
They were cartwheels.
Oh, cartwheels. Okay. Well, something where it's like flipping over.
Upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were upside down.
When I turned a certain age, we'll say, I retaught myself how to do cartwheels, not just the right way, but the other way.
And I was quite impressed since I could never do cartwheels.
So I finally, after years and years and years of being in the same classes, caught her attention.
Yes. And then we slowly got to talking more and more. And there was one time where I invited her down to this vacation property that we have. And
in Chincoteague.
And on the way back, Karina was saying, "Oh, let me play you some stuff." Okay. And these were tape recordings of
a channel called Michaela Sheldon.
Yeah. And then this is Karina's version, right? I started sort of like whispering to her. We're driving in the car. There's nobody else there. It's me and Karina, right? I'm driving and I start whispering to her, "Oh, I saw my dead uncle," right? And I tell her these stories of stuff that had happened to me, right? And then she's okay, because it's part of this channeling thing, spirits and dead people and energy and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And then she's saying, "Oh, why are you whispering? There's nobody else here." And then
was she actually whispering like
I was whispering.
She was whispering.
And then it's like because
I could barely hear it because of the hum of the car.
I'd gotten so used to not talking about this stuff because if you start talking about this, people will think you're crazy.
If you start talking about it, you're going to end up doing a podcast. That's really what happens. But I have been like doing this stuff for years because it was part of my own healing journey but Diana was secretly having these interactions,
And that's a
so
good word to use. I like that word,
yeah,
interactions.
these interactions and keeping it all to herself. And so
Well,
I
I would
think
tell my sister because my sister kind of like had the same things too, right? And they're
Okay.
basically just with, dead relatives.
Okay.
and so we and I think that's probably why I noticed Diana in the very beginning, because I often notice people that I think have some kind of clairvoyance to them.
Mhm.
It's just something I pick up on. And so I was probably just waiting and waiting for her to be like ready. And then she invited me down. We had these conversations and they built from there. Diana started working with a acquaintance of mine, taking classes from her, and
An animal communicator.
yeah,
Okay.
Mary Beth Decker, who I think you know, and
Mhm.
Diana, just as far as I could tell from all the clairvoyants I've ever worked with her channel, she just leapfrogged into, communicating very clairvoyantly with all kinds of things. And we were having so much fun talking on these. We decided that maybe we should record our conversations.
Yeah, because Karina is incredibly knowledgeable about all this stuff. Me, I didn't know anything,
Which makes her
right?
a really good channel.
Didn't know anything at all. So she'd be telling me all this stuff. I'm thinking, oh, okay, this makes sense. This doesn't make sense. I've experienced kind of this. And
I
this
told you
seems,
something that didn't make sense. Just
yeah.
kidding.
Well, let's talk about those initial conversations. So and this goes to Diana, you were having, the word is now interactions with whom or with what? And then, well, let's start there. Because I don't want to jump into too many questions at one time. So what were your initial
Okay.
interactions?
Tell me about the little white guys.
Oh yeah.
They're fun.
This is actually really interesting. Okay. And this came out of Mary Beth Decker's animal communication class, right?
Okay.
She'd be talking about, I mean, she gave us all kinds of tools with respect to just communication and then healing and healing physical things as well as healing emotional and spiritual things with your animals, right? And so at one
So
point,
do you have a pet that's passed
I have 3 cats.
have passed?
Oh yeah. Well,
Okay.
okay. Multiple ones have passed too. Yeah.
Okay. And so that was the
Unfortunately.
focus of getting into the class.
Oh no, and talking to live and dead animals,
I think the
both.
focus of getting to the class often is like taking an animal communication class is
Mhm.
often like easy bridge for someone to begin practicing their clairvoyance,
Okay.
because in the animals we do it anyway,
Okay.
when we think,
Well, talking to animals is basically telepathy.
yeah. So
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
even though we think it's not, and they're looking back at us like they're talking back to us, it's a lot of telepathy. So it's a great bridge. But Mary Beth Decker she has a whole much deeper layers than just the animals, and that's
Yeah.
Okay.
She's
Okay.
that
got
was
this.
open to Diana.
Yeah. So anyway, these I can't remember when they first appeared, but it was something that Mary Beth had asked me to do. Kind of like, oh, you see something, because I would be seeing something in people's bodies, right? And so, oh, you're the first one I tried this on, but
She expanded quickly out of animals into people.
right,
Just like
okay.
that.
But anyway, it was with Mary Beth that she said, okay, call upon sacred divine beings to help you. So, and then these little white guys showed up. I mean, this is just, in my head,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Not really.
Okay. So you wouldn't see them out here, you'd see them in here.
Yeah,
Okay.
in my imagination.
I
Okay.
try to see her imagination or her field of vision versus in her head,
Okay,
so
whatever.
she doesn't end up with a shrink.
But anyway, so I mean, they're about this high usually.
Wait, do that
Well,
again.
That high.
There you go.
okay, in space about a foot tall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And basically, they're just sort of like these billowy white robes with this little head sticking out. And they just come floating down, flying down. And then I ask for a 2 or 3 or 4, whatever, however many I think is needed for the problem. Okay.
Okay.
And they come down and they bring whatever tools they need with them and they start working.
Which could be anything from axes to chainsaws to
Right. Vacuum cleaners.
torches to vacuum
Okay.
cleaners.
And to give Karina's example, she's the second one I did this on, right? She was complaining about a pain in her neck. So I looked in her
Like
neck,
an actual discomfort.
actual pain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like my neck, my shoulder felt like it was going like this, and I couldn't release anything.
Right. So I looked in her neck again in my imagination,
Mhm.
right? And I saw this black gunk there. So
No need to define it.
okay, it's black gunk, right? So I'm thinking, oh, this doesn't look good, right? So I called the little guys down, and I forget how many I asked for, but they came down and they came with a little vacuum cleaner, and they started vacuuming all this stuff up.
And my shoulder just went like that, and I could move it again, and my neck was all like free.
They're vacuuming it up, And once they get rid of all the yucky stuff that's in there, or they push it back into place or whatever, if there's
Mhm.
stuff to be removed, depending on if it's really toxic, right?
Mhm.
If it's really toxic, they have to be very careful and they wrap it up. But if it's not, they just kind of like push it all together with their hands, and then they fly up. They're taking it to love and light,
Mhm.
okay, until they're all finished, right? Sometimes this takes, I don't know, a
Couple of
couple of
sessions,
hours.
a couple of hours. Okay.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
you could do it all in one session, in one
yeah,
air, in
sometimes
one
it's
time.
very easy. Sometimes it's very easy to do. Sometimes it takes a while longer. But
Okay.
when they're finished, I just sort of like envision white light coming in there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I actually have done this for numerous number of people.
So she just,
So
yeah, and it's interesting, that this works, but I found it really fascinating because my knowings have always been like bigger visions and bigger knowings, and I've had these, connections with angels and with, feminine, sort of creative, archetypes and stuff
Hmm.
like Sophia. And Diana comes in, and everything I see and feel in my visions is not defined. And what she comes in and she's like, everything's defined. She's like these little white guys, or she sees the figures, or she sees
the gnomes.
actual beings, and
Hmm.
I'm just seeing light and space, and her descriptions of these little things are just so fascinating that we're like, sometimes we're going off and talking about these things that show up for her, and these are like almost like being in some kind of you know storyline, like a fairy tale storyline.
It's like for me.
I know they're on her
Well,
head.
before we kind of go off in different tangents, because I want to keep us focused on what's going on with the two of you, um, I could easily recognize that you are dealing with different spiritual entities, and so the ones that you're talking about in terms of these white little figures, air elementals, and I want to be really clear because you mentioned gnomes and they're earth elementals, and so
Right.
what I'm going to do in terms of the conversation is kind of give a disclaimer before this particular conversation to kind of explain to my audience, because this is a new space for my audience to
Oh.
recognize that, and that's quite all right, because it's part of my journey, my soul journey as well. And so, given the space that they may get a better appreciation of of what we're talking about,
Mhm.
I kind of I want to give them a disclaimer that we're going to be talking about spiritual elements, spiritual components, and such as that. So another disclaimer I want to give, and I'll give it now, is that Mary Beth Decker was on the Question Guy podcast earlier in 2024. And so when she talked about having conversations with deceased pets of her own, and that kind of opened up a new world for her. So I'm really glad that she has grown in that space and that she's helping others really appreciate the grieving process as well as the healing process that comes with, losing a pet. And so that's really a good thing. But one of the things that we had discussed offline before we got into this conversation was specifically, Diana, that you have interactions with deceased relatives, and specifically one relative in particular, and that
Uh,
was your.
grandfather.
your grandfather. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. Okay. So
And then I want to come back to Karina's story, but I really want to get into that because that was an essence of something that was very significant in your life.
oh yeah. Well, the first time this happened was many, 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 many years ago. I probably was like in my 20s or something. I was visiting my aunt in Vienna, Austria. She had just lost her husband,
Hmm.
and her deceased husband had a son and daughter by a former wife, right? And so I was there for about 2 months, and the son would come over, and one time he came over, he brought a pear-shaped flat table. It was about 4 inches high. It was pear-shaped and made of pear wood. There's three legs on it, one of the legs being a pencil. And then he says, okay, this is a tool for automatic writing. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to try it out, right? So we put a piece of paper on the dining room table, taped it down, put the pear-shaped pear table on the dining room table. And remember, it's got one of its legs is a pencil.
Yeah, that was very
And
clear.
we three sat around the table, and he said, you put your fingers on it. This is like a Ouija board, right?
Mhm.
And and then it's like, who's going to be asking the question? Because somebody has to ask a question. So I said, yeah, okay, I'm going to ask a question. You don't have to ask it out loud. So the question I had was, is if my grandfather on my dad's side is around, he should make himself known. Okay, so that's what I was thinking. And then boom, I could feel him behind me, right? I knew it was him because it just felt like him.
Mhm.
And the little table started moving.
By
And not,
itself, but without anybody touching it.
no, we were touching it, but
Okay.
then it started moving. It's like, oh, we're not doing anything. We're not doing, okay. We put our fingers back on. It starts moving. It starts moving. And not just little movements. It just like goes up about 6 or 7 inches, goes back down 3 or 4, goes up 3 or 4, back down. And we all say we are not moving the table, right?
Mhm.
So it finishes, it stops. My grandfather's still there. And I mean, I got a really good feeling from him. He was a very loving grandfather. And so next morning, I'm looking at this piece of paper that's taped to the table, and I realize, oh, this is an M. You know, the old European style, spiky style of handwriting.
Okay.
My grandfather's name was Michael.
Okay.
So, okay, he answered my question. He was there. And then from then on, it's like he would, like, in times when I needed to be alerted about something, or or so like some kind of danger coming around, he would appear. The last time, well, now he appears more. Okay, and he appears like with this light around him, and I see him more as a not an energy, but the way he used to look to me, right,
Okay.
as a person.
Okay.
But the last time he appeared in the former way, just to warn me about something or to protect me, was like a couple of days before my husband and I were supposed to take a vacation last August. We were supposed to go up to upstate New York. One of our cats stopped eating, and she was just lying around. And I'm thinking, oh God, if she doesn't start eating the next day, I'm going to have to take her to the vet.
She's an old cat.
No, it wasn't that old,
Oh.
um, maybe 12 years old,
Oh,
10,
okay.
12. Anyway, and it looked like she had gotten quite fat. She liked to eat. Okay. She liked her food, but she stopped eating. And then she was just kind of like lying on the floor and thinking, oh God, this is why he's around now. It's like something's wrong with our cat, right? So we took her to the vet. The vet said, well, looks like there's this mass on her. You have to take her to the specialty vet. So we took her to the specialty vet, oncology, right? So they discover, okay, it's this fast growing tumor.
Mm.
All this, there's tons of fluid accumulated in her. And according to them, she doesn't really have too much time left, a couple of weeks or whatever. So we're faced with this dilemma.
Mhm.
Should we cancel our trip and and sort of like deal with her, meaning sort of like keep her
Comfortable.
comfortable as
Yeah.
can be for the next couple of weeks, and then put her to sleep or whatever,
Right.
or and also drain the fluid from her, which would actually come back. So we just made a decision. We're going to put her to sleep that same day, and then we went off on a vacation. Okay,
Hmm.
because we didn't want to lose any money. But anyway, I was I was really down. I was devastated, right? It's like, my grandfather is still there all this time. He's still there. He's still there. A couple of days into the trip, it's like his energy starts to change. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. He's going into protective mode because he had never been there that long before. Before it was just short periods of time. This is like days on end, right?
Right.
And so I'm thinking, okay, he's in protective mode. Maybe he's got other stuff to do. And the weird things started happening on that trip. This was a canoeing and hiking trip. Um, the soles of my husband's shoes fell off on a long hike.
Mm.
Got lost on a hike and had to spend the night in the woods. Um, uh, her ashes. Um, they didn't do what we asked them to do with our cat's ashes, right? And so, like stuff like that. And I still didn't make the connection between this what I still thought was my grandfather there, right? And all this stuff. But I was all that time was like really depressed. Anyway, we get back, and Mary Beth has her continuing program to expand intuition, and there's a couple of people in there, and I'm telling them this story. They all say, that's not your grandfather.
Mm.
And he was still there, right?
Hmm.
That's not your grandfather. And then they say, Mary Beth says, you have to get rid of him, right? Right. So it's basically very easy to get rid of entities that attach onto you because your just vibrations are so low because of your whatever emotions you're feeling, right?
Right.
So they helped me get rid of this thing that was not my grandfather, right? And I realize now, oh, okay, it's like this is why it felt so different. It was flat as opposed to my grandfather's kind of like, I don't want to say three-dimensional energy, but it was like a real person. This was not like this was like a flat person, right?
Okay.
Um,
But you didn't know.
but
You
I
weren't
didn't know.
sure.
I just thought it was my grandfather somehow changed his energy some way because he had to be there for multiple days.
Right.
But that
So
apparently that doesn't happen with your loved
so
ones over there.
right. But anyway, that's when I realized, oh, okay, that's a way to actually tell whether or not you're having an authentic experience, right? Because this did not feel like my grandfather, even though I tried to explain it as my grandfather. It was just something that had attached onto me because of how I was feeling. And it's just, okay, you just take it, grab it, in your head, right?
Hmm.
And then you just take it up, or have, I don't know if the little white guys were involved, but something was involved in taking this up to love and light, where it
So
it was being helped up there.
well, that's good. And so that was an
Never
issue
came
that
back.
it never came back. And so that was an issue that you learned how to deal with in terms of recognizing uh your grandfather's energies and his energies and frequency levels.
Yes, and also distinguishing others' frequency and
Right.
energy levels, and if they are really who they are.
Right. And we need to come back to that. But before, and this is what I want to do because this conversation needs to kind of continue, but fundamentally the Question Guy podcast lasts for about 30 minutes. So we're going to make this a two-parter. But before we end part one, Karina, I need you to introduce your story and how you are interacting with energies in your own way. Can you do that for us?
Yeah. what do we have? 2 minutes left?
Well, we got some time, but I just want to make sure that we what we need to get to is introducing how you interact with energy and spiritual entities. And then we want to kind of bring you back, but for part two, because we want to talk about your podcast and how all of this space that you're in introduced a podcast space that you
Right.
now talk about, all of your interactions and how you help people. So, Karina, tell us, how do you interact with spiritual beings and energy?
Yeah, so my journey's quite different than Diana's. I back when I was in my 30s, I had gone the path of getting quite ill, and eventually there was like everything wrong with me, and I was kind of like, wow, I might not actually live to 40 if I
Oh my
keep on.
God, wait, what?
No, I was really sick
Oh
and
wow.
depressed and everything, and I just had every chronic condition that could have ever existed, and then I ripped some muscles, so I couldn't really sit anymore, and take sitting out of your life, and life gets really uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
And so um, I stumbled on some non-allopathic um, stuff, starting with massage, and then I worked with a doctor that did acupressure techniques for removing allergies. Turns out,
Mhm,
I was allergic to the entire world, which I'm sure some of your listeners can relate to. And he was also a nutritionist, so he worked with getting me aligned with food, and one thing led to another, and I've been working with lots of medical intuitives and clairvoyants ever since, and having a great time with it. And I worked with a medical intuitive out of Vermont called uh, Miriam Wolf for 20 years almost.
mhm.
And it's just fabulous stuff, because I can't understand anybody now who goes to a doctor and doesn't get a very factual answer as to what's wrong and exactly what to do about it, because I'm so used to that. It's like, but I'm free of all that now, all that ailment and stuff. And I have formed these relationships with angels. A very powerful one I work with a lot is Archangel Michael. And I also work with the Sophia consciousness.
Mhm.
And that's really about wisdom, really understanding non-duality and um, truth on many levels, and, you know, other truths versus your truth. And it's really allowed me to open up to realms that for me are now like commonplace. Like I've just recently been introduced to my home star, apparently is Sirius, and all the Syrians have come down to reconnect with their lineage on Earth, and this is starting to get really out there. But for me, it all makes sense. So there's all these beings that are working with us right now to kind of take this whole earthly existence into, I don't want to say a whole new consciousness, but really a whole new consciousness that was sort of introduced when we recognized fully like quantum physics. So we know now everything's energy, and we know our intentions move it around. But there's that brings with it this whole dimensional understanding of our true capacity to do that,
Mhm.
because we're still dealing with a lot of physical bodies, dense bodies. And it's one thing to, allow your mind and your spirit to embrace that, but when your body can embrace that as well, then you're really opening that up. So I've studied food, how food can help allow your body to become more clairvoyant.
Mhm.
And anyway, I work on a lot of different levels, and most of my work comes through art. So I channel, these are some samples back here, some of the
So
work I
that's your
did.
work?
Yeah, it's a couple of my pieces. And so my art is designed to like be channeling symbols or something that is transformative, not looking at the past, not looking at problems, but looking at, possibility, potential, transformation. Where could we go? and not defining it as it's traditionally been defined, because a lot of metaphysical art is like, people in flowy gowns, clowns, and angels with halos and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
I don't really channel that. Um, and meeting Diana was like a real joy for me, because she's just so quickly clairvoyant, and I'm like, man, I can talk about anything, and she, even if she doesn't get it, like a day later, she comes back with something equally as profound that just came to her, and I'm sitting over here working with maybe Sophia, and she's sitting over there working with Horace, and, and there's a few other symbols that have come to me recently that are really powerful. And we're just, we're like, we're basically what Diana does that I think almost no other clairvoyant does, is you see her sitting over there giggling, is she's just like, makes this really fun. Like there's nothing serious about what we're doing, even though it's all serious stuff.
No, it's not serious stuff. Okay.
Well, it isn't.
Can I just say something about the Syrian thing?
Oh, the Syrian thing. Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Now, it's like, if I didn't experience this myself, right? I would, that, like Karina said, this is going a little far out. When she first said, like, but I had already had some kind of strange experience where at some point last year, so like these energy beings they're just pure energy, and they're just floating around like this. There's two of them, and they're just circling around like this.
Like the figure eights in this thing back here.
Yes, in my head, right? And at some point, I'm wondering, like, why are they here? Like, who are they? And so I think it was Karina says, well, ask who they are, right?
Yeah.
So I asked who they were, and they said, we're Arcturians.
Yeah, the Arcturians were here.
Okay. That's another planet off somewhere, right? So based on everything that comes in my head, right? I know I'm not making this up. And it feels authentic. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is kind of like real, similar to what she was saying, what she's saying was serious. It's like, okay, I believe it.
So yeah, it's really nice to just sit down and have a conversation and not really feel like anybody's judging anybody, and it's just pure fun. And we're playing with, anything that comes up to be played with, and beats. Color Pink came not too long ago, the Spirit of Small Birds was our most recent podcast, and the birds just appeared and they're sitting there and they're like, want to tell their story. Or one day we were talking to the dolphins and a fish appeared and it's like angry, and we're like, well, why are you angry? And he's like, because no one ever pays attention to us. And dolphins this and dolphins that. And we're like, okay, what do you want to say?
Well, what we want to do is we want to kind of close up the first part of this, because we want to talk about that aspect, because that's really what moves you into your own podcast, and being able to talk about these experiences and the reality beyond what our five senses can understand. And so with that, I want to say thank you to Karina and Diana for joining me on the Question God podcast. For those of you who've been watching and listening, stay tuned to part 2 when I publish it. So it's been a blessing. So let's end this conversation. And before we do, I want to ask you one final question, and then we'll close, because this is kind of a little offbeat type of conversation that we're having. That's typically have been my conversations. Why, and this is going to both of you, so I need a response from both of you. Why are these conversations important to you? So I don't care who goes first to answer, but you got to answer for both of you. For both of you, this is why they're important to you. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll end this conversation.
Okay, I can give you a very clear answer.
Please.
It's like, for whatever, I don't know how it came upon this, but it's like my mission. I don't want to come back. I don't want anything unresolved. We come back all the time, right? I want to move forward. So moving forward means like working on yourself, increasing your frequency, your vibration. It's like letting go of anything negative, turning like
And you
And
want to do
also,
this in a public forum?
no, what was the question again?
Why are these conversations important to you personally?
Online or just in general?
No, in general, I'm taking it to be in general, right?
Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because they go into stuff that I'm thinking about anyway, and that I'm using for myself to educate myself and to move myself forward so I can move up and move on.
Perfect. Karin, why are these conversations that you're having about spirit, energy, frequency, why are they important to you?
Um, well, I feel like for me, kind of feeling like I'm a visionary artist, I'm so excited about everything that we haven't talked about.
Mhm.
And I'm always really excited about doing it in a um light way, without getting heavy about anything. I just, taking the combination of, visionary work and the lightness of being. And just for me, it's about creating. It's no different for me than the painting. Each podcast carries a vibration. Um, if you're called to listen to it, chances are it'll have an energy that'll make you feel a little better, even if, the words don't always resonate with you. But I guess for artists, they always understand that the more people that hear or see or experience the work, the more the work grows and amplifies its abilities to do its work. So it's just, I'm happy to be here talking to people and drawing them into, experiences that aren't every day. Because I think there's, as an artist, a visionary artist for me, I need to share it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a way to
So,
educate.
But hopefully I'll get some karma points for it too, like Diana said, and I want to come back and relive some.
well, that's good. And so with that, let's go ahead and close conversation one. And so for my watching and listening audience, I thank you for joining us and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Keith. Bye.
Bye.
So we're going to go into conversation two right now. You
Oh,
ready?
right now. Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
If you've got time, I've got time.
Yeah,
sure,
okay.
we have
since
time.
I've got you on the call. So
Okay.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce
How
us
you're
to
going to do that?
same what?
Wondered how you were going to do that.
We're going to stay on the call and I'm going to edit it.
Okay.
I've got a video editor on the back end. So when conversation two is going to focus on your podcast and what you talk about on the podcast and how I'm assuming that the focus is to help people at least kind of regain a sense of what? So what's the focus of the podcast? Your podcast.
Um, it's to help people open up to
Yeah.
more, more than to give them a glimpse of what else is out there and what
Okay.
else can be accessed. I don't
Okay.
know what.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, a lot of times, if you want sort of like formal or informal, any kind of training in this, you in some cases you got to pay big bucks
Or take a long time.
or take a long
What
time.
training in
And
what?
In sort of
access
like
points.
communicating with sort of like a non-physical your spirit guides,
Hmm.
spiritual entities, any kind of energy, getting guidance.
Well, you
Um,
went to Mary Beth, and so apparently you went to one of her courses or something like that.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So you paid
But
her to help understand how to process all this
with
information.
animals, right?
Right.
But that is only like
Well, that lends
3%.
itself that lends itself into, greater understanding.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. But if you
So
actually look
what's
out there, there's people that are charging like mega bucks for this.
yeah,
I think
because
yeah, but I think that we're just introducing people to the multidimensional aspects
okay.
of of everyday elements. Like we have sitting here, you know, sunflowers. They were on our podcast one time.
The sunflowers.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you talk to him
And
on the podcast?
yeah, we
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
And
What's the name of the podcast?
the 1 to 9 podcast.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start that conversation. Is
Oh,
it
I
is that what
mean,
it's called? 1 to 9?
Yeah, the 1 to 9 podcast.
but the specific um um the specific podcast, it had a name too, right? I can't
Well, I
remember.
meant the name of the podcast, and
Oh,
not the theme
Oh,
of the
1 to 9
show. Okay, 1 to 9. Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing. Let me know when you're focused. Let me know when you're ready for part 2.
Focused.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally. This is the Question Guy podcast. I'm here with Karina and Diana, and we're here for part 2 of the conversation that we had before. Now, this is going to be published back to back. I do want to welcome you to the call. And the reason I separated this into 1 and part 2 is because in part 1, we focused on their personal stories and really how they met each other and how they really were introduced to the metaphysical world that's all around us, but we can't see it. Their story was so intriguing, and they created a podcast around their experiences that I brought them back specifically to talk about their podcast and how they have conversations with things that we don't typically have conversations either about or with. And so your podcast is is called 1 to 9. Let me get that right.
Or the 1 to 9 podcast.
The 1 to 9 podcast.
We
So
we listed in the feeds as the 1 to 9 podcast.
so the 1 to 9 podcast. So 1, welcome back to the show. 2, let's get into this conversation. So how have you been since our first conversation? Let me ask you that.
Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty
Doing
good.
pretty good. Let's talk about how your podcast got started. So how did your podcast get started? And what is really the focus behind what you're doing with the podcast?
So my memory of why we started it was because we were having these conversations. Sometimes they would last an hour or two, and we were having so much fun talking about whatever and the multidimensional aspects of it that we were like, hey, we should record these conversations.
Well, it was your idea.
Oh, I thought it was yours. But anyway,
Oh, and I thought it was your idea.
I think it was yours, but whatever. You need to take credit. No, I don't know. I don't know. If she says it was mine, I always thought it was hers, but maybe we got lost.
I'm a more technical person. I would have no idea how to set up.
Well, I could
start
do it,
recording
but
stuff.
we do have a producer as well, but we could do the podcast. I could make sure we did the podcast, but it doesn't mean she didn't have the idea.
So what do you do on the pod? What's the focus of the podcast?
So every day we invite in a guest.
Well, not every day.
Every time we
have
do
a
it.
podcast.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we invite in a guest, and we often don't know who the guest is going to be ahead of time,
Well,
which
most times we don't.
which drives me nuts because I always I want to prepare some questions or get some thing ready, and the guests just don't appear until the moment of. Like one day I was out grocery shopping. We didn't know yet who's going to be on the podcast. And I'm like noticing these beats, and the beats are like, oh my God. And so I'm like, I go over to them. The beats are like, you've got to take me home. And I'm like, all right. And they were so beautiful. They were fresh red beets with a little bundle of them with the green leaves still intact. And they were so beautiful that I couldn't even put them in a bag or anything. I just laid them on top of my other groceries to take them home. They were just so compelling and beautiful. And I knew that I had a rapport with these beats already. And so Diana comes over ready to do the podcast. And she's like, I'm like, well, what are we going to talk about? And she's like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden I'm like, the beats. And she's like, yeah, the beats wanted to be on the podcast. So I bring them out. And it's like, so, but to start out, we create a creative space, a sphere of helpers for us, multidimensional helpers, which includes spirit guides, animal guides, Sophia, Horus. Who else is in it?
I don't know,
ETs,
whole bunch of
the good ETs. Anyway, there's these beings that we call in to hold sort of a safe and honest and true and joyful space for us to have this conversation.
Right. And it's gotten so that they're very excited to actually come and listen. And there's kind of like bleachers set up there.
Yeah, now they've set up bleachers.
In the spiritual realm.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. So I need to go back to the thing that you said earlier. Specifically, you don't literally know who's going to be on the podcast until maybe the
Well,
time you press record.
okay. No.
So
Sometimes
kind of talk me through that.
Okay, so like in the case of when we were going off to Hawaii to swim with the dolphins, we
Okay.
decided, okay, we're going to talk to dolphins for a number of podcasts.
Okay.
We knew beforehand, we invited them in, but we also knew that they wanted to talk to us.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
your guests aren't necessarily like somebody like me who's going to talk about an idea of spirituality. It's
No, our
something a little
guests
bit.
are never real living people.
Okay, okay. So I needed to make that clear to those who are watching and listening so that they can kind of get an appreciation of how you scope and frame these conversations on your podcast.
There are
So,
plenty of people inviting people who speak about spirituality out there, but we're
right.
actually,
So you're doing something very, very different.
yeah.
Okay. So you've had so you don't necessarily have fish or dolphins on your podcast. How does that actually work?
Okay.
Well, it's a this is this is the metaphysical part of quantum physics, right?
Okay.
You can invite them in, and the couch that we're sitting on is usually where they sit.
Okay. So how do you know that they're there? I really want you, I need you to
Okay,
explain
so I can
the
sense their
whole,
presence.
okay.
I can sense their presence. Diana can actually see their physical being
Or their energy.
or
Okay.
their energy. And sometimes, like in the case of the beets, I brought the beets out and the beets joined us physically.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, because they're vegetables. Right.
right.
Yeah.
Or we did when we did a podcast on water, we actually prepped for that one and we brought out different kinds of water to be
Like
on the
tap
podcast.
water, filtered water.
Spring water, water in art glasses versus water in plain glasses. We did do a setup for the water. They gave us a fair warning, gave a
Yeah.
couple
Yeah.
hours. Um, so so sometimes it is a tangible thing, but
Mhm.
it's still a multidimensional aspect of something that isn't normally accessed multidimensionally, unless it shows up in a kid's cartoon or something like that.
Right.
So,
So,
Right. So basically, we're accessing their energy.
okay. And
and
I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
so the consciousness of the being that we bring on the guest varies quite a bit too. So if we're talking to a dolphin or a whale or something like that, they have like a huge, vast body of knowledge. So you could talk to them for hours or bring them on many podcasts. And they have um, almost like interest in us as well. Versus when we bring a beat on, their depth of knowledge is very small. And so they don't have as much to say. And but they do have something they feel important to say, but they don't have, you can't really talk to a beat for hours and hours and hours on end, but you can talk to a dolphin.
It's actually turned out to be very funny. They like to make jokes.
Right. Yeah. So that you learn something about the beets and the beets aspect, and they talk about a little bit about how best to eat them and
What other vegetables they like and like
stuff like that. But it's a small consciousness versus a dolphin has a large consciousness.
Okay.
There's different aspects to what we're bringing in, and we're finding this out as we go.
Okay.
So some things, it's and we're sensitive to that energy and that subject and that.
So outside of vegetables and animals, I think we also had a pre-call that you talked to colors and
okay. There've been
colors like
viruses, gut bacteria. We
Color,
mentioned water,
color pink.
colors. Okay, the
okay,
color pink.
right.
Um, uh, fictional creatures like dragons.
Okay.
Um,
They weren't fictional, they were real.
They're
okay,
mystic. Well, they're mystical. They're not fictional. Okay.
okay,
Okay.
mystical creatures like dragons. Um, and then I guess
Horus.
Horus. Again, mythical, the Egyptian god, right?
Yeah, we're with you. Uh-huh.
And
So you've actually had conversations and communication with these different entities, these different
Right.
vibrations.
yeah,
Um, I'm really interested right now in the color aspect. So I recognize that color is used in therapy color therapy, so that each color has to have a different frequency, a different vibration, because colors are also related to our different chakras, the 7 basic chakras that align with our spinal system in our human body. So there has to be a way of interacting with them in a very intentional way. So have you had those conversations, or have you had,
Well, the only color we've worked with is pink,
have
actually.
you, okay. And
Um,
go
not
ahead.
one of the
It's
basic,
not, yeah, it's not one of the 7 basic.
but it was actually really interesting. So
Yeah.
So how did that work?
So Pink showed up. And what we had done is once Pink said it was going to show up, I ran around and I grabbed a bunch of pink things from my house. And we happened to, just by dumb luck, already be wearing pink clothes for that one. So we could talk about our clothes too. We didn't realize that was going to happen. But we had, things like watermelon. We had a couple pieces of artwork, several different types of artwork, which represented different shades of pink and different patterns of pink. And then the pink kind of described what it meant to be like just a flat pink versus a pink with a pattern. So once the pink started to take motion through lines and patterns and stuff, it actually increased its vibration quite a bit. And then it talked about its emotional signature, which was
love.
and
I don't know what.
it was love and joy.
Oh, okay, love and joy.
Is not love. It's love and joy.
Okay.
It was a loving joy color. And how that could actually, be used to bring yourself into some loving joy is to wear pink. But it also talked about, just the aspect of pattern in pink. Like just a flat pink was totally different than a pink with pattern in it.
Yeah, it said
really raised the vibration to have a pattern in the pink.
Yeah. It said
So a pink
texture was like really important.
Right. So
really important.
A pink flower would, like a rose with the pink swirls, a swirl in particular had a lot of vibration to it, would have a much higher vibration than just a pink square or a pink shirt. It was very interesting. And then the pink, also I asked the pink at one point, and Diana does a lot of the answering for the she can, along with her ability to see things like the little white men, because I have more knowings, she
Well,
hears.
she's innately clairvoyant.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
she hears sometimes the actual phrases and words that they're saying. So,
right, which is why I can't remember lots of it.
Right.
Because I kind of like forget it afterwards.
Well, I'm also going through the editing and setting it all up too, so I go over it more often than you do afterwards. But it's so one of the questions we asked Pink, which was really interesting, was what would make pink a better color than red? Why not red? Because red is love if you're looking for, high vibration. And Pink's answer was, because sometimes they're funny, Pink's answer was, there's a fine line between love and hate.
There you go.
So you stay in the pink zone, you stay in the loving joy zone, you go into the red zone and you're awfully close to hate.
Wow. That was a good response. And I do
know.
appreciate that.
So,
and straight to the point too.
right, exactly. So our guests are often funny in some way, they're just like, they have an interesting sense of humor. But yeah, I don't know. The colors show up. I can sense they're there. She can actually hear the voices.
What other things have we?
Well, let me go. Very clearly, you've mentioned spiritual beings, and so that has to take on a different level of maybe, and forgive me, importance or level of intensity, because these are beings that have influence over human behavior.
Well, yes and no.
We
Yes
did
and no.
did one that was really powerful though, that Horace was helping
The
with.
mud guy.
The mud guy. And the mud guy was a spirit that was stuck on Earth for a long time, and he wanted to go. And he was a really dark, heavy.
Yeah, and his feet were like stuck in the mud, which is why we called him Mud Guy. He was calling himself Mud Guy.
Where is
where
where
he
or
now
what is he?
he's in love and light, right? But
Okay.
for who knows how long, he was just stuck. He's mired in the mud. He
Right.
couldn't move.
Was he once human?
Probably.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I'm asking you.
You asked Mud Guy if he was once human?
Yeah. Mhm.
He was.
Okay.
Yeah. So he never transcended when he was done with this earth and he was
Right.
stuck here. So we brought in a panel of spiritual beings in Horus, right?
Horace and who else was there?
And that was a
Thea.
very serious one, where we actually helped free Mud Guy from this earth and took him up. I don't
Right.
think we got to laugh in that one at all.
Yeah. Well,
Sometimes you have to. I mean, it's about helping people and
Yeah, and
even
so
entities.
right, and we don't know who's going to show up. And this Mud Guy, but it was also educational to us because we learned that sometimes there's just when you feel a heaviness around, it's just something that's stuck here,
yeah.
And if you can see it, maybe you can help it go. Lots of times we're like, get out, and trying to push evil stuff away when sometimes it just really needs some help. I think that's what
Was
we
the
found.
Portals? Was the Portals a podcast?
Oh, we did a portal podcast to see if
Again, getting rid of energy that's stuck.
in the house. We did a podcast where we used a diagram, but we doused a whole house and found portals in each room that were entities in each room that were like stuck energies. And
Yeah.
In
And
whose house?
Karina's house.
yeah, we did my house. It's so lucky.
Well, you actually you should be considered, lucky or at least blessed at this point because you got rid of the negative energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
sometimes they are kind of serious like that where we doubt
But
my
okay,
house.
but okay, with respect to being serious, right? For the closing the portals and getting rid of the negative energies, a sacred divine being was called in, right?
Oh, what do you mean?
Okay,
Who?
so like there's spirit guides, but there's also tons of
Well,
Expert.
experts
Well,
that
you
you
mentioned earlier you called in Michael Archangel Michael at one time, at some point.
Well, I call him in to work with my life a lot, but I don't know if we called him in on this podcast yet or not. Did we call Michael in?
I don't think so.
Not yet. So
Okay.
he might be on it, but Diana has
Because
been
he's heavy duty. I mean, he's a major player in the Archangel hierarchy.
he's a major player. He's also kind of represents one of the elements. I can't remember, but if you read deep enough into him, the four archangels are like also representative of like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and it's the four elements.
Well,
Carbon,
those won't be the four elementals. They are fire, water, air, and earth.
and nitrogen.
Okay.
So nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon are the four basic building blocks of everything.
Of physical earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes the archangels are equated with each one of them has a signature of those as well. I
Okay.
mean, they're that integrated into all of our beings if you're really looking for the power. But Michael's called upon a lot, and that's why he has some of the most power, because the more he's accessed, the more he he
He also gets the benefit of being in the Christian Bibles. So we recognize that name quite easily.
yeah, exactly. So Christianity is kind of the biggest thing out there. Although I was raised Baptist, and we didn't talk to angels where I came from. That was
Well, I don't
the
think
thing.
Christians do either, but he is mentioned a couple of times.
Yeah.
So he seems to have the power. But
Yeah.
so who did you call into?
There's tons of other sacred divine beings out there.
Right. But who did you call in specifically to close the portals?
So
Okay,
there's experts.
so what one has to do is you actually you want one with expertise in the problem you're trying to fix, right?
Right.
So we called in somebody who was experienced in closing portals and getting rid of negative energy.
And who would that be?
Getting rid of negative energy.
No, who would that be? Which
I didn't
spirit?
ask who it was, right?
Okay.
Because don't ask by name just because there's tons of them out there, right? But
And you may only use them once.
they're once you call them in, they're there for you, right?
It's like a package delivery guy is.
Right.
Well,
So anyway,
my concern was
A
because you
little
had
girl
A little
Go ahead.
girl,
Wait,
a
wait,
little.
wait. Let Keith
Oh,
ask his
sorry.
question.
My concern was that when you had the experience with your grandfather and it turned out whatever happened kind of
Oh,
replaced. So it's really good to know who you're working with because you don't want to
I'll tell you. I'll tell you how
She's
to
gonna,
do this.
yeah, she's
Okay.
gonna explain it.
So you identify the expertise that you want, the kind of expert you want.
Okay.
You call them in, and then you have to ask them questions. The first question is, are you a sacred divine being? If there's silence or any kind of hesitation, they're not.
So they have to speak the truth.
They have to say yes.
Do they have to speak the truth?
Yes.
No, if
Yeah.
they don't speak,
If they don't speak, if they say yes, you know for sure that they are.
Well,
she-
human beings have the potential to lie. So do spiritual beings have
They're
the
not
potential?
human beings.
So they don't have the potential to lie.
Right, exactly.
Okay, we need to be clear with that.
Okay,
That's
so
all.
once you hear them say yes, you ask them the second question. How did you get your expertise? Right? And I had done this like I was looking for a financial help. So I got this is just to illustrate.
Mhm.
I got a yes. And then how did you get your expertise? It's like, oh, I had worked with many kings previously, and I enlarged their fortunes greatly. And that's when I realized, well, he had this shiny, so like uh, male, like the shiny armor on
Okay.
with a shiny cap.
Okay. Helmet.
It's from the Middle Ages. I don't want this. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
go away. Anyway, this little girl showed up when I asked for an expert in closing portals and getting rid of negative energy. Little girl in pigtail shows up. I asked, are you a sacred divine being? Yes. How did you get your experience? And, they always have to provide a specific answer.
Okay.
I've done this for X number of years, and I have multiple experience getting rid of.
well, she gave I don't know if we remember this answer she gave, but she gave some kind of answer that was right. And she can hear the answers. I'm more of, this is a knowing for me whether this is happening or not for real.
Like with the chain armor guy, right? That's what he said. So it's like, okay. But with this little girl, okay, she's good. And we started working with her. And she had a little basket with her too, where she'd gather up this negative energy and just stick it in the basket, right?
It's a bottomless basket.
Bottomless basket.
So Karina, I've got to ask, how does your home feel now?
It feels even better. I'm always doing things to upgrade it. And it's amazing to me, like smudging it or whatever. And the art itself, rearranges from time to time. It's got little energies to it that try to uplift it. And it's amazing to me that, because it's an old house it's an old, built in 1902. And it's amazing how many angles you can work on something to actually get it fully, completely done, get it fully cleared. So yes, my house feels really good. I think there was even like a couple rooms that were like, I had some old art in from other people, and they said, we don't want that. We don't want that art's not high enough vibration. So along with this, we have to add, you have to change the art in those rooms. So I did that.
But you are an artist.
I am, but I'm also, I also collected stuff from other people. And
But you add to the higher vibration in the home because you bring it from your your internal.
right, exactly. I channel it in, and it brings a vibration, a transformative vibration for myself and my home, and whoever else buys it, puts it in their home.
I love it. I love it. So let's go ahead and finish this conversation with this aspect. What has been the most significant or the most memorable podcast that you've done?
Oh my.
That's a
And
really
just
hard
pick,
question.
and you could pick one each or just one for the two of you. So
I'll tell you, the public seems to like the bacteria one the most, or the Chincoteague fairy ones the most. The
we'll
public, Love that.
Pick one. Tell
I
me
have to
about
tell
it.
you that we talked to the fairies and gnomes also.
He,
Well, which one has been, again, either the most significant or the most memorable? For one, for the two of you, or for one from each of you?
This is a really hard question. Really
Just
hard.
pick one, because you could always come back and talk about another
Uh,
um,
I don't know, maybe the lobster one. Was there one just about the lobsters?
there was one, but that I think you like that story more. It was more of a recounting of a story than a channel. But
Oh
yeah,
no. Well, it was, yeah, that's true.
the lobster one for you.
I guess so. I don't
The
know.
lobsters.
Tell me about the lobster.
Or the pig collective. I don't know.
The
Tell me about
lobster.
the, now you got me here. You
Oh
got me.
no, that's also channeling, right? But part of the channeling was outside of the podcast, therefore it
Yeah.
becomes the story, right?
Right.
So it's like one day these lobsters come to, I like seafood, right? So the lobsters,
By the way, on the record, I'm a plant-based eater, so I don't eat lobsters. But go ahead with
but
the
she did
story.
this one time.
But I
She
do.
did. Oh,
Yeah, so
okay.
the lobsters appear, and it's not a whole bunch of them, just a couple of them, and they're saying, eat us if you want to expand your consciousness. Okay. And they give me this example like, okay, you'll be going from a dark room into this enormous room filled with light. So I'm thinking,
If you eat them.
if you eat them. So I'm thinking, okay, I like lobster. Let's try this out.
So she gives me a call. She tells me what the lobsters are telling her.
And we go out and eat lobster.
Well, we made a plan. We went to the Eastern Shore. We had to go there because we were trying to get fresh lobster, someplace where they flew them in because we're not in Maine. We're
Yeah.
not in the territory. And
You were staying at a friend's house
I
there.
was staying at a
Yeah.
friend's house, not too far from a place where they served fresh lobster. And
So Eastern Shore, Virginia, Jersey,
no,
Maryland. Maryland?
Maryland?
I think it's Maryland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we have the nice lobster dinner.
Okay.
And about 12 hours after, like,
By the way,
Oh.
just a little before you tell that story, I get the sense that this is a shift in the consciousness of hydrogen that's taking place. And one way that you could absorb it would be by eating lobster.
Okay.
So the lobsters being, living in the ocean where there's the most hydrogen existing.
H2O. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So that shift was taking place by the earth and the sun. They were all making little consciousness shifts, which is part of this, shift in consciousness that everybody's sort of feeling, our connectivity of others and stuff like that, as all the elements are changing as well. And so they're shifting consciousness, and eating the lobsters was one way to absorb that. You probably could have swam in the ocean regularly too and absorbed it as well. But the lobsters spoke to Diana. And so that was fun adventure, right? So I ate the lobsters too, because I was hearing that that would be fine to eat them. I only stopped eating meat and fish because my body was vibrationally going like this. And I'm like, all right,
Not
if I
gonna
stop
work. Yeah.
eating you, then my body calmed down. So it was just I don't know how long I'll be like that, but that was my calling.
okay, but so like,
So
and
we
then,
go out and we have this amazing lobster dinner
it takes
with
12
the
hours or
bibs,
so
the bibs and all.
to digest. Next morning, it's like I wake up and it's like I'm thinking, ooh, I can feel the lobster consciousness in me, right? I'm not asleep. I'm not dreaming, right? I'm just feeling this. And then
Mhm.
and then it seems like, oh, I'm at the bottom of the ocean. I'm actually looking at stuff, things down there like a lobster. And then it's like, I feel my throat changing. And it's like, oh, I can breathe underwater. And all this is just like really bizarre, bizarro, you know. And then that passes, right?
Mhm.
But there's a kind of like a sequel to this because about 2 weeks ago, I had this the same image, these the breathing underwater like a lobster came back to me, and I felt like my throat was changing. But I also had a remembrance of a dream I had many, many, many years ago when a good friend of mine died, and she was dead already. She was on the part of the boat that was underwater, and there was this iron door between us. I was on the part of the boat that was above the water. And she was underwater and she's talking to me like, come down here, come down here. And I realized if I come down there, but I can't anyway because the iron door is there. If I come down there, I'm going to die.
Mhm.
Anyway, about 2 weeks ago, this dream comes back, but it's not a dream. It's just like if images come back in my head. And it's like, I realized, oh, now I can go down underwater and talk to her.
Well,
Well, there was actually an interesting other sequel to that whole lobster thing.
did you?
Did I talk to her?
Yeah.
No, that's kind of like I didn't try.
Oh,
Not
okay.
yet.
Not yet. So,
Sorry,
but
Karina.
Now we're gonna
other
have
people
to
have told me
follow
that
up.
that they actually felt something in their throat about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So Diana also, there's one other piece that's kind of interesting that shifted for Diana was before that, she was afraid to get in the ocean.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
And she has this place on Chincoteague, and we'd go to the beach and I'd be in there swimming away. And she's like,
Yeah, I don't want to go.
I'll sit up here and read my book. And, but we then went to Hawaii together to do a swim with the dolphins week.
Yeah, yeah.
And she got in the water and swam around.
I mean,
no
it's like
problem.
my
Couldn't get her out of
fear
the
is
water.
like almost gone.
Couldn't get her out of the water. It was just,
Yeah, I
she
know.
didn't get
It's
cold or
like,
anything. So she has something shifted in her that way. Mine was more of a subtle, gentle thing, which is typical for me. But for Diana, it's pretty profound. She's now part lobster.
I love it. So with that, let's kind of close this by saying what impact do you want your podcast to have on people? And let's leave the conversation with that. So what
I,
impact do you want your podcast to have on people?
I think it would be nice for people to hear and be aware that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. And I also want people to, I want it to be a bridge for opening, a bridge for more opening, any way that people can find ways to connect with the world around them or find ways to connect with their inner knowings or their
Okay.
inner senses, because I feel like, um, I feel like we're all connected. That's kind of a kumbaya statement, but at the same time, we're really connected with everything. It
Mm.
isn't just we're one people, we're one with the water, we're one with you know, the the world around us, even though we take different physical form and we take different experiences, we're still, we can still share in the experiences of so much more than just people and animals. It's like, yes, you know you can really communicate with, energy has all the information in it. I mean, quantum physics sort of says that, but it becomes metaphysical once you really embody it and understand it. It's like everything that has any kind of, existence is accessible to us, and
Yeah.
I think it'll make people's enrich our lives and our experiences to do that. And so we just want to introduce it to people.
And I just want to add that lots of times people just discount things that just pop into their heads. I was like, what is this?
Mm.
Weird. And I was like, they stop. I mean, it may seem like imagination, right? But anything that you imagine or that comes into your head or that you notice, everything is important, right? Everything. And that's
Just
don't dismiss anything. Also feelings.
but
However,
also,
however you get information, it could be actually voices that you may think are talking to you because we all have internal dialogues, right?
Mhm.
You could get a dialogue that's not really internal, but so like your spirit guide talking to you or your higher self, right? Or images that you see,
or Pink could be talking to you for a second.
or feelings that you
Bye
get
me,
and
bye
you think,
me.
oh, it's like, well, why it's like
But also,
strange.
I think our podcast, for the most part, makes a big deal about keeping it light and fun. It's not really stuff to be afraid of. Like so much, there's been so much in our history we've been afraid of the unknown. You know, I really think that most of the unknown is like most people, it's all good. It's just some of it
Yeah,
is.
it's your monkey mind that's saying, no, be afraid, be afraid. It's
Yeah,
like,
and if you have
don't pay any attention to your monkey mind.
right, and if you have things that are in your house that are sort of nefarious, I mean, sometimes they're there because they're comfortable there, but you can ask them to go, and you can get rid of them. You don't have to put up with that either. It's not that hard in the end. You don't have to make, you don't have to call in the high priest and
Exercise your home.
eyes your
Abso-
home, and
Absolutely.
it can be kind of fun to do and lighthearted, and um I think the more people hear about this stuff. And also the other thing I think is really important is that right now there's so much open channels. There's so many open channels that you can leapfrog into things very quickly, like Diana did, and you can do it safely, and you can do it in your own integrity. You don't, you don't have to, you know, even if you study with someone, which I think is a good idea, you don't have to follow their stuff dogmatically. You can open up and bring your understanding to what they're guiding you to learn.
I love it. That's
I think in the
perfect.
past, they wanted you to learn their stuff, memorize it, go out, do it like they did. And those formulas worked and stuff, but now I think really it's the responsibility is to learn the stuff and make it then your your access, your access points and your abilities, and mush it all together. It's free. We're free.
Yeah, it's free. And
We're free to be happy.
right.
So
I'm
let's end the conversation there. I do agree with that because what I've learned this week, specifically this week, maybe it's been coming a long journey forward. Each journey is our own, and that's perfectly okay. So I want to thank both of you for being on the Question Guy podcast. Can't even talk now. It's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know you, your stories, and the impact you want to see with your podcast. And so for my watching and listening audience, I do appreciate your time as well, and I'll see you next time. Take care.
Appreciate all of you too. And thank you, Dr. Keith. You've been
Yes,
most fun to
thank
talk
you.
to.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Okay, I'll see you next time.
Great. Bye.